Hello, girlies. It is Georgia speaking. I am yet again alone. Olivia has limited time this week, and I just thought that I'd smash out this last part of Lake Alice by myself with you. Well, not by myself. You guys are here. So it is the week of Halloween, and Halloween marks the 1-year anniversary of our podcast. We have officially turned 1. It is our 1st birthday, y'all, on Halloween. And to celebrate, Olivia and I are going on a spooky adventure. We are going to the Beechworth Asylum to do the ghost tour. Yay! I cannot wait. I'm very excited, and so is Olivia. We are going to do our best to vlog what we can. And then we'll chat about it in our next podcast and let you all know what we experienced. So keep an eye out on the Instagram and YouTube for those vlogs. I'd just like to say thank you so much from the depth of my waters for listening to our podcast and getting involved and enjoying it. It just brings us such joy to know that our podcast is bringing you guys joy, even though we're talking about highly depressing topics. We love you, we're obsessed with you, and we just want to give you the biggest thanks for tuning in, following, sharing, rating our podcast, all of the things. Appreciate you so much. So we're just going to jump right into this part 3 of Lake Alice. We've got a lot to get through. So in the previous episode, we talked about some more of the abuse that happened to Lake Alice. And in this episode, we're going to talk about how Lake Alice came to be shut down and what happened after, the reparations involved and the consequences that were taken for those that inflicted such horrific abuse to children. So January 1973 saw the first recorded complaint of abuse at the unit to the Department of Social Welfare by a boy who had been sent there from Holdsworth School, which is a boys' home. After being transferred to a different facility, the now man, known as Mr. E.G., told his Department of Social Welfare social worker that he had been given shock treatment as punishment at Lake Alice. He reported that electroconvulsive therapy was administered to him without muscle relaxants and other medications to prevent pain and injury. He stated that the shocks were used as a form of punishment for misbehaviour rather than any therapeutic purpose. It's a brave thing to do as a kid, to report your abuse, knowing that if it comes back to you, you're going to be abused tenfold. So, very brave move. The social worker wrote a letter detailing the boys' complaint to their director at the Department of Social Welfare, but the supervisor was reportedly unconcerned and did not believe that the abuse was actually happening. No surprises there. No substantial investigation was launched in response to this initial complaint. Unfortunately, this failure to act, along with subsequent dismissed complaints, allowed Dr. Selwyn Leakes, that little twerp, and other staff members to continue their abusive practice for years. In mid-1974, Dr. Leakes oversaw 4 children applying electric shocks to a 5th child at the unit, as we've already described. Acting Chief Educational Psychologist Don Brown raised serious concerns about this with Dr. Sidney Pugmire about improper use of ECT. Brown's concerns were sparked by the knowledge that Dr. Selwyn Leakes was misusing ECT as a form of punishment and control. He was also aware of reports later confirmed in the Royal Commission of Inquiry that children were being given electric shocks without anaesthetic and with electrodes placed on sensitive areas like their genitals. Despite Brown raising the issue with Pugmire and other officials like the head of mental health, Dr. Stanley Miriams, being aware of the alleged sexual assaults, the issue was not dealt with properly. Surprise, sir, fucking prize. That is not the last time we're going to hear of this. A magisterial inquiry was held into the unit in 1977, but the Department of Education was not forthcoming and did not tell the inquiry about Brown's 1974 investigation. Brown's report, which was critical of Leakes' ECT use, was never supplied to the inquiry. The failure to provide this crucial information appears to have been part of a wider pattern of institutions protecting themselves and the reputation of psychiatry over the welfare of children. I hear that. January 1976, the Citizens Commission on Human Rights toured Lake Alice Hospital, accompanied by a patient's mother, and raised concerns in several media articles about the placement and treatment of children at the hospital. This visit resulted in several media articles, including one in the Wanganui Chronicle, which reported that the hospital had become a quote, dumping ground for unwanted children who were being treated with drug therapy and electric shock treatment. So, in response to the publicity, the head psychiatrist, Dr. Selwyn Leeks, strongly denied the allegations, dismissing them as, quote, arrant rubbish, end quote. Of course, in July 1976, parents of a boy known as CD in the inquiry, sent to the unit by the Department of Social Welfare, complained to the Ombudsman. The parents of this child complained that various decisions and actions of the Department of Social Welfare and Health had been unreasonable and unlawful. This child entered the unit. Mr. CD entered the unit in April 1976 after getting into trouble at school and with the police. Mr. CD's parents were concerned about his behaviour and contacted his school principal and social worker, as you would do. There is some suggestion that Mr. CD required psychological help, and his father wished to show the authorities that, although his son had behavioural problems, he was not mentally disordered. It was on this basis his father requested that Mr. CD be received into Lake Alice for assessment only. Dr. Leeks then assessed Mr. CD, diagnosed him with a paranoid schizophrenic condition, and said he was a danger to society. What? On the 26th of April 1976, a reception order was made based on these opinions. Mr. CD's parents understood their son was being admitted to Lake Alice as a voluntary patient, and he could be removed at any time. However, when they sought to remove him from the unit, they were informed by staff he was a committed patient and they were unable to do so. What? The Ombudsman was later satisfied that Mr. CD's father was not fully aware that by applying for his son to be received at Lake Alice, he had applied for a formal reception order, unbeknownst to him, lacking informed consent, I would say. The Ombudsman considered the fact the form applying for a reception order was filled in by someone else, but signed by Mr. CD's father. In subsequent interviews with Dr. Leeks, the parents expressed their strong desire for their son to be returned home. From May, Mr. CD was granted trial home leave for the weekend. On one of these weekends, his parents called the unit and informed them Mr. CD would not be returning. Obvi, I'd do the same. A staff member accompanied by a police officer then went to Mr. CD's household and explained the legal implications of the reception order. Mr. CD's father then allowed him to be escorted back to the hospital. I mean, if you are the parent of a minor and you have guardianship over that minor, you have every right to withdraw a mental health act, I would think. And if that's not the case, that is how it should be. After this incident, Dr. Leeks issued instructions that Mr. CD not be granted home leave without permission from himself or the charge nurse. In July, Mr. CD's parents were upset to learn Mr. CD had been convicted and sentenced in the Children and Young Persons Court without the hospital informing them of the charges. His parents then contacted their solicitor and made a complaint to the Ombudsman about their son's detention at Lake Alice. During the course of the Ombudsman's inquiries to the Department of Health, it was discovered Mr. CD's committal papers were defective. The Director of Mental Health asked Dr. Pugmire for an explanation. On the 29th of July, Dr. Pugmire responded that the intention had been to admit Mr. CD formally, but they had discovered they hadn't fulfilled the requirements of the Mental Health Act of 1969. He said now they were aware of the issue with his committal papers. They had changed Mr. CD's status to that of an informal patient. They did not inform Mr. CD's parents of this change, however. So they're going on thinking that he's still, being detained. And the hospital staff are letting his parents think that. It's just so wrong. Mr. CD's parents remained concerned about his detention at Lake Alice and visited their general practitioner on the 20th of August to discuss their concerns. They then visited Mr. CD in the unit and expressed their concern about his continued stay in the hospital. After they left, a senior staff member told Mr. CD about his change in status. On the 23rd of August, Dr. Pugmire met with Mr. CD's parents and attempted to persuade them to allow him to remain in the hospital for treatment. Against Dr. Pugmire's advice, they decided to take their son home. Good on them. Dr. Leeks then contacted New Zealand Police and the Department of Social Welfare to seek some authority to readmit Mr. CD against his parents' wishes, given he was not considered mentally disordered. What the helly? What the heliante? Mr. City was brought before the Children and Young Persons Court on the 27th of August, where a direction was made placing him in the custody of the hospital, pending a hearing in September. In September, the Children and Young Persons Court made an order placing Mr. City under the guardianship of the Department of Social Welfare, which admitted him to the unit as an informal patient. What the frick? During this second admission, Dr. Leakes decided to start Mr. CD on a course of ECT. What a fucking surprise. Just punishing him. Because nursing staff found him to be, quote-unquote, difficult to control. Okay, well, maybe he doesn't want to fucking be there because he doesn't fucking need to be there and you're fucking making him be there. The fuck? He's not mentally unwell and you're going to make him that way if you continue what you're doing. Dumb fucks. Anyway, Dr. Leakes neither informed or sought consent for Mr. CD's parents or the Department of Social Welfare before giving the ECT. Not surprised. The fact that he's fighting to have this kid in the institution when he's got two loving parents at home who want him home, he should know as a psychologist that being home with his parents is going to be far better for his mental health than to be in a place like that. He is a sadistic man. He loved to torture these children, and you can just see it plain as day. He fought to get them back in his grasp so that he could continue to torture these kids. It's fucked. In August of 1976, educational psychologist Mrs. Lynn Fry contacted Dr. Oliver Sutherland from the Auckland Committee on Racism and Discrimination regarding a patient at Lake Alice known as Hake Hello. Hake Hello was 6 years old when he and his family moved from Niue to New Zealand. Because he did not speak English, his language difficulties were wrongly perceived as an intellectual disability, and he was placed in a special education class. After his father died, Hake got into trouble and was sent to Owaraka Boys' Home in 1976 at age 13. He was transferred to Lake Alice after staff falsely told his mother he was being taken to a special school. What the fuck? Hake was given electric shocks as punishment for minor offences. He described the pain as feeling like two huge knives being driven into my head and said he would beg Leakes to stop. With staff censoring letters from residents, Hake devised a clever and brave plan to tell his family about the abuse. Hake drew pictures of smiling stick figures with speech bubbles. In the speech bubbles, he wrote secret messages in his native Niuean, knowing the hospital staff would not understand the language. One message read, "Mum, the people are giving me electric shocks and injections. It's painful. I'm crying." What a brilliant kid. Definitely not mentally disabled in any way. The Royal Commission of Inquiry later used one of Hake's drawings on the cover of its report into the abuse of Lake Alice, and we'll put that drawing up on the Instagram because it is haunting to see a smiling stick figure that a child has drawn with a speech bubble saying the most horrific thing. But anyway, later that year, after receiving Hello's message, the Auckland Committee on Racism and Discrimination made his story public. The resulting investigations and media attention led to the unit's closure in 1978 and prompted Leakes to flee to Australia. Hake spent his life dealing with severe lasting trauma of the abuse. In 2021, Hake gave emotional testimony to the Royal Commission of Inquiry into Abuse in Care, which acknowledged that the children at Lake Alice were tortured. In December 2024, the government formally apologised to survivors and announced a compensation scheme. Hake then passed away just 9 months later. What an iconic human. With one picture, he single-handedly ended most of the suffering of those children subjected to the abuse at Lake Alice. And they told these children they were nothing, they were useless, they were defects, they were mentally ill, incapable of being great. And this one kid who didn't even speak English figured out how to close the entire system down. Just so amazing. In June of 1977, Dr. Stanley Merriams referred complaints of abuse to District Inspector New Zealand Police and the New Zealand Medical Association, and an investigation ensued, albeit not a very good one. In September of that year, New Zealand Medical Association Ethics Committee made a complaint against Dr. Selwyn Leeks to the New Zealand Medical Council about fucking time. The complaint made by a former patient named Kevin Banks in 1977 alleged the following. Dr. Leeks deliberately used ECT machines as punishment on more than one occasion. These were not conventional medically supervised treatments, but were painful shocks for unsatisfactory behaviour such as smoking. Banks alleged that on at least one occasion, he and another boy had their arms strapped together and were shocked jointly. He detailed a particularly egregious incident where Dr. Leeks instructed several boys to take turns giving electric shocks to a boy who had sexually assaulted them. Dr. Leeks then took over and completed the aversive therapy, quote-unquote, himself. In November of 1977, the New Zealand Medical Council investigation into Dr. Leeks ended, apparently not upholding the complaint. Ugh. The Medical Association's Central Ethical Committee had considerable doubts about the ethics of using aversion therapy on patients without their informed consent. Duh. The committee felt that allowing abuse victims to shock their abuser was grossly unethical conduct, likely to bring the reputation of the medical profession into disrepute. However, the committee and the medical council ultimately minimised the complaints. They gave more weight to Leeks' version of the events and failed to question factual inconsistencies, prioritising the reputation of the medical profession over the patient's safety. As a result, the complaint was not upheld and Leeks received a certificate of good standing before quietly leaving the country. What the actual fuck? What the heliante? Like, seriously, what is that? This is 1977. It's not 1920. Like, how did they come to that conclusion? Especially when they said that his practice was called grossly unethical conduct. Like, so frustrating. So in January of 1978, the New Zealand police investigation ended with a decision not to prosecute. Oh my God. In 1980, the unit was closed and there was no clear date of closure. But thank God it's closed. Am I right, ladies and gents? In 1987, the United Nations Convention Against Torture ratified and the Crimes of Torture Act is passed. It provides a domestic legal framework to prohibit and prosecute the crime of torture. Prior to this, acts of torture could have been prosecuted under other existing laws, such as those governing assault or causing grievous bodily harm. However, these laws did not explicitly define or focus on the international crime of torture, which is specifically defined as an act committed by or at the instigation of a public official. The Act incorporates this definition of torture, which includes intentionally inflicting severe physical or mental pain or suffering on a person for purposes such as obtaining information, punishment, or intimidation. This definition includes anyone in the service of the Crown, such as police, armed forces, and judicial officers, and I would hope medical professionals. In August of 1994, a few years later, Mrs. Leonie McInroe filed a civil case against the Crown. You go, girl. Leonie McInroe was the first person to file a civil claim against the Crown, seeking compensation for the abuse she suffered as a patient at Lake Alice. McInroe, who was at Lake Alice between 1975 and 1976, filed her claim in the High Court in 1994. Her lawsuit brought attention to the systemic abuse, as she was a credible and determined plaintiff who spoke out publicly and inspired others to come forward. Icon. In the mid-1990s, McInroe's lawyers sought $1.5 million in compensation. McInroe stated, quote, "I believe I deserve this amount, given what has happened to me. My losses were huge, and I live with them daily." Snaps to that. The Crown fought her claim using aggressive legal tactics, of course, and delayed the process for 9 years. According to McInroe, this was an additional ongoing and sustained abuse. I bet. Instead of accepting liability, the Crown tried to strike out her claim using technical defences, including that McInroy's claim was too late under the Statute of Limitations Act of 1950, as too much time had passed since the abuse occurred. Also, that it was immune from liability for actions taken under the Mental Health Act of 1969, as long as staff acted in, quote, good faith and with reasonable care. That definitely didn't happen. This required the Crown to defend Mr. Leakes' actions as legitimate treatment, a position that drew significant criticism. I would hope so. This strategy was emotionally and financially taxing for McInroy and other survivors. The Crown was more focused on protecting itself from liability than acknowledging the harm done, despite records showing evidence of abuse. There's so much evidence. McInroy eventually settled her civil case with the Crown in 2002. The financial details of that settlement were confidential. She has since expressed regret over the settlement, which she said was reached without full accountability for Dr. Selwyn Leakes and others involved. Of course not. He's living it up in fucking Australia, apparently. Not anymore, because the cunt is dead. Thank God. Good riddance. Burn in hell. So this inspired survivors to come forward and seek compensation themselves as well. In July of 1997, Grant Cameron Associates began negotiations with the Crown on behalf of a substantial cohort of survivors, which grew over the next 4 years. In October 2001, the first round of survivor settlements with the Crown began. The government set aside $6.5 million to settle the claims of 95 former patients. The settlement was conducted through an out-of-court process with a retired judge, Justice Rodney Gallen, determining the amount for each claimant after hearing their story. So it's like, oh, what degree of torture did you receive? Okay, you get this amount. The redress was limited to financial payments, and there was no impartial investigation, admission of wrongdoing, or holding of individuals accountable. Each survivor received an apology from the Prime Minister and the Minister of Health at the time. Big whoop. The law firm representing the 95 survivors, Grant Cameron and Associates, deducted a substantial amount for their legal fees, approximately $2.6 million from the total settlement. The fuck? I would do that for fucking free, given what they went through. How dare you take their compensation for the absolute torture and abuse they fucking received? Obviously, you have to get paid for your job, but this, man, this is obviously a special circumstance. The Crown should pay for the fucking legal fees. What? This left the survivors receiving an average of $41,000 each, significantly less than the $70,000 average received by later claimants in the second round, whose legal costs were then met by the Crown. Thank goodness. In October of 2024, more than 2 decades later, the government announced it would reimburse the survivors for the legal fees that were deducted. Better late than never. In 2002, the second round of survivor settlements with the Crown began. The Crown set aside an additional $5.7 million for this round of settlements. Claimants in this round had their legal costs covered by the Crown. This resulted in significantly higher average payouts for the survivors compared to the first round. Approximately 90 survivors participated in the second round. From 2003 to 2006, there was a second New Zealand police investigation. The investigation was prompted by a government invitation in 2003 for Lake Alice survivors to bring criminal complaints to the police. Dozens of survivors, assisted by lawyers from a group settlement process in the early 2000s, submitted their claims to the police. The investigation focused on criminal conduct by former staff, including Dr. Selwyn Leakes. The Royal Commission identified numerous significant findings in the 2003-2006 investigation. However, the officer in charge of the investigation had formed a negative view of the survivors' credibility and did not believe an investigation was justified. Police did not properly manage the file, and key evidence was lost. The investigation was not given priority or adequate resources and saw little progress over its 4-year span. Advice was sought from the Crown based on the evidence of a single complainant, despite police having 33 other statements. The police also failed to follow Crown law's advice to conduct further investigation into the use of electric shocks and formaldehyde injections. Basic steps were not carried out, including interviewing complainants, staff, or potential defendants and seeking relevant records. Just laziness. In March 2010, after the investigation had ended, police announced that no criminal charges would be laid against Dr. Leakes, citing insufficient evidence. What? What the hell? This conclusion was reached despite police having received advice from the Crown Law suggesting further investigation was warranted. Meanwhile, Dr. Leakes surrendered his practicing certificate in Australia, avoiding a scheduled hearing of the Medical Practitioners Board of Victoria into complaints of abuse by several Lake Alice survivors. He got to Victoria and they said, "What the hell was going on in New Zealand, mate? Hand over your medical licence, you piece of shit." At least we did one good thing. So because the second police investigation was such a wild success, obviously there was a third. Like what? In 2006 to 2010, a third police investigation was conducted. This, surprise, surprise, was another deeply flawed and inadequate investigation that failed to produce any charges. Great. Just great. Wonderful. Good job. The investigation was narrowed in scope to focus almost exclusively on the use of electric shocks by Dr. Selwyn Leakes, overlooking extensive evidence of other abuse, including sexual and physical violence by other staff. The Royal Commission of Inquiry found that the police in charge of the investigation demonstrated a biased attitude, treating survivors as unreliable witnesses and assuming staff were well-meaning and dedicated professionals. What on earth? Why even bother if you're just going to come to the same fucking conclusions? Jesus. In 2010, police announced that there was insufficient evidence to lay criminal charges against Dr. Leakes or any other staff members. Are you kidding me? Did you do this investigation blindfolded? Or some shit? July 2017, Mr. Paul Zentfield complained to the United Nations Committee Against Torture regarding the abuse he suffered at the Lake Alice Psychiatric Unit. His complaint exposed New Zealand's repeated failures to hold perpetrators accountable and provide an effective remedy to survivors for decades. Zentfield was admitted to Lake Alice multiple times as a teenager in the 1970s and was subjected to ECT, immobilising drugs, and solitary confinement as punishment. In his complaint, he highlighted the lack of accountability and justice he experienced through New Zealand's legal systems. Go off, King. The United Nations Committee Against Torture considered Zentfield's case and, in a landmark decision in December 2019, ruled that New Zealand had breached its obligations under the Convention Against Torture. Thank you. The international ruling put significant pressure on the New Zealand government to address the historic failures in its justice system. Good. March 2018, Malcolm Richard complained to the United Nations Committee Against Torture. Richards was 15 years old when he was sent to Lake Alice for 2 months in 1975. He was subjected to ECT, often without anaesthetic and sometimes to his genitals, as well as being diagnosed with schizophrenia and administered drugs he said still affect him. The complaint alleged violations of multiple articles of the Convention, focusing on the failure to investigate and provide effective redress. The United Nations Committee Against Torture ruled that New Zealand failed to conduct a prompt and impartial investigation into the abuse, denied Richards an appropriate remedy, and failed to provide fair and adequate compensation. Their ruling in Richards' case reinforced the earlier finding from Zentfield's complaint and amplified international pressure on the New Zealand government. The decision was significant in prompting the government to formally acknowledge that what happened at Lake Alice was torture, a stronger finding than simply referring to it as abuse. So between 2018 and 2021, you guessed it, there was a fourth New Zealand police investigation. Fourth time lucky, I guess. In 2020, the New Zealand police launched a new in-depth investigation into the complaints, which was the fourth official police inquiry. The United Nations Committee Against Torture's ruling, along with the ongoing Royal Commission of Inquiry, led to official apologies from the New Zealand Police and Medical Board. So you should. This ruling and international scrutiny were instrumental in the government's decision to offer a new, more comprehensive redress package to Lake Alice survivors in 2024. Thank God. In December 2021, New Zealand Police announced charges to be laid against a former nurse at Lake Alice and announced that age, infirmary and geographical barrier prevented charges being laid against Dr. Leakes and one other former nurse. So because he was old and infirm, and in Australia, they were like, ugh, whatever, we'll let him get away with it. Jesus. But don't worry, because in January 2022, Dr. Leakes died. rest in distress. In 2024, the New Zealand government announced a new redress scheme for survivors of torture at the Lake Alice Psychiatric Hospital. This scheme was implemented after years of advocacy by survivors, a Royal Commission inquiry, and rulings by the United Nations Committee Against Torture that found New Zealand had breached international human rights conventions. Survivors who met the eligibility criteria could opt for a streamlined process to receive an immediate payment of $150,000. That's more like it. The redress is available to survivors with confirmed admission to the Lake Alice Child and Adolescent Unit between 1972 and 1977 who can declare they received unmodified electroconvulsive therapy and or a paraldehyde injection. The scheme also includes access to ongoing support for services for survivors, including counselling and mental health support. The redress was flawed because the eligibility criteria focuses specifically on unmodified ECT and paraldehyde only, excluding other forms of abuse and torture that occurred at the unit, like isolation, physical abuse, and sexual abuse. Like, what? Critics also argued that the capped nature of the fund and the expedited payment option did not fully account for the severe and lifelong harm caused by torture. Richards has been critical of the government's subsequent redress scheme. He chose to reject the offer and take the government to the High Court in May 2025, arguing that the scheme is unlawful because it does not provide an enforceable right to fair and adequate compensation as required by the Convention Against Torture. Go off, King. I cannot wait to see the outcome of that. I hope you get everything that you deserve and more. So the Royal Commission of Inquiry into Abuse in Care, specifically for Lake Alice, is called The Beautiful Children. It details the recollections of the survivors and examines the torture and neglect suffered by the children and young people admitted, often for no good reason. You can read that online. Most, if not all, of the information I used in this topic was from that report. So you guys can check that out if you wish. But yeah, shocking that we have the ability to do this to children. And it wasn't that long ago. I keep saying it was not that long ago. It just goes to show how power and control really goes to your head. Either that or it's just people who desire power and control go into these positions of power in order to get that, to feel powerful, to abuse others. It will never cease to amaze me, baffle me, and shock me. All at the same time, makes me sad. It still goes on, and I wish it would stop. I wish there were better ways to weed out the scum in our healthcare system. But it really does, governance really comes into play here. Like, there were complaints made as early as 1973 and nothing was done about it because people assumed that the healthcare professionals in charge of children were doing their best, quote unquote. It just makes no sense. It's like, why wouldn't you immediately investigate? Anyway, I'm glad this is over because this was highly depressing. But anyway, thanks for listening. If you've got any comments, please put them in the Spotify comment section or on our Instagram. Send me a DM, send me an email. You can contact me about anything in relation to these episodes. Also send requests and send me your nursing nightmare fuels or spooky stories if you've got any. We would love to share some of your spooky stories if you've got any on our Halloween episode. Okay, let us know. Thank you so much for listening again. We love you, from Olivia and I to you. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.